survive on a deserted island for 2 months and earn $3 million. The catch? You can only bring 10 specific tools. You must build shelter, find food, and survive, all while guarding against attacks from cougars, black bears, and wolves. Can you survive in such conditions? The challenge takes place on Vancouver Island, known as one of the world's densest areas for black bears. So much so that on the first day of the competition, a contestant was already scared off by a black bear. The first contestant, Larry, married young and entered middle age without experiencing youth. His children are independent and life has become dull. He joins the wilderness challenge to enrich his life, essentially to earn some retirement money. Larry's drawn location is not ideal, with no flat ground in sight, making it difficult to set up even a temporary tent. After searching the area, he finally finds a decent spot by the sea. He cuts down branches for beams and sets up a tarp with a log on top to secure it. However, Larry abandons this newly built shelter for reasons many might guess. While searching for a new camp, it starts raining, making the dense, slippery jungle difficult and dangerous to navigate, and he even injures his eye on a branch. Larry quickly loses his temper. The next contestant, Desmond, finds fresh water nearby as soon as he lands, an essential element for wilderness survival. He sets off to find a suitable campsite, but soon encounters bear droppings and panics. Desmond, who joined the military at 19 and experienced live fire training, considers solo wilderness living a minor challenge, boasting that he could handle a bear. However, he immediately steps in fresh bear droppings, panics, and runs a great distance before finally finding a campsite. Since bears have a sense of smell 2,100 times stronger than humans, he tries several times to hide his emergency rations but fails due to either fear or the branches being too high. Suddenly, noise from the bushes sends him running towards the coast in fear. This girl must be a pro. She started by pulling out a willow tree, both to make space for her tent and to avoid getting hurt by falling dead trees. After all, personal safety is the priority in this $1 million survival challenge. Tracy, once an Air Force scout, became a grandmother at a young age. Now that her children have their own families, her only joy is her dog. She joined the challenge to enrich her inner self and for the $3 million prize, though her tattoo seems a bit unlucky. After some effort, she managed to set up her tent. She's truly bold, unafraid of the black bears that roam the island at night. Once her camp was ready, she went to look for food and was amazed to find the beach covered with her favorite mussels, enough to last for months. Unfortunately, she couldn't eat them due to the red tide season, which causes a massive bloom of toxic algae contaminating the shellfish with paralytic toxins that can be fatal in high doses. She had to look for other food sources. Switching to Larry, he found a relatively flat spot and decided to set up an A-frame tent for shelter. He cut down a small tree for a crossbeam, then covered it with a waterproof tarp and secured it to the branches, fixing it at the edges and placing logs inside for support. His temporary shelter was complete. The next contestant, Mary, got wet as soon as she arrived. With the temperature around 11 degrees Celsius, she needed to quickly set up camp and start a fire. Luckily, there was a flat area nearby. She just had to clear the ground a bit. Mary, a former forest firefighter, is naturally skilled in wilderness survival. She joined the challenge to push her limits. After clearing the ground, she chopped a log for a crossbeam, covered one end with a tarp, and propped up the other end with an A-frame. Her temporary tent was soon finished. The camera then moved to Desmond, who was completely panicked by the thought of a bear. Terrified a black bear might appear, his trembling hands broke the saw. Just starting, he had already sabotaged his chances. Sitting on a rock, his mind went blank. After much thought, he decided to quit the challenge, not just because of the bears, but mainly because he broke his saw. Without this tool, his chances of winning were slim. Withdrawing might be the wise choice. Although he didn't earn the $1 million prize, he did get a one-day island adventure. Hopefully, he'll adjust his mindset after returning. Let's see how the other contestants are doing. Larry needs to quickly start a fire because the island is densely populated with black bears. Without firelight for protection while sleeping, survival and winning the $1 million prize would be risky, even life-threatening. He can only hope for luck now, as worrying about bears might just invite trouble. After nightfall, roaring sounds nearby indicated that Big Bear and Little Bear might be looking for him. There are black bears outside, 2 of them. Larry, despite his fears, tried to shoo them away by saying, "Go away, go away." Meanwhile, Tracy was also disturbed by noises around her camp, making her too scared to sleep. She quickly grabbed an axe to keep by her bed. Still feeling uneasy, she took out a bear-repellent whistle just in case, fearing it might be a cougar known for its stealth and ability to travel up to 24 kilometers at night. Realizing she couldn't outrun it at 250 pounds, she resigned herself to whatever happens as long as it doesn't disturb her sleep. The camera then moved to Mary, who fortunately wasn't on the black bear's radar, but was disturbed by heavy rain causing insomnia. Thinking about her wet boots added to her irritation. She struggled through the night and was annoyed the next morning to find her down sleeping bag and clothing backpack soaked. After a moment of scratching her head in confusion, she cleaned up the wet items inside, tied them together, and made 2 A-frames, then laid a waterproof tarp over the beams and covered it with a green oilcloth, completing her shelter reconstruction. A giant seaweed, which also served as Mike's breakfast, was part of his strategy to win the $1 million survival challenge. Mike had to utilize all the island's resources. This seaweed-like plant, rich in protein and starch, tasted as sweet as sugar. The giant kelp beside it could grow more than half a meter a day. Although he could survive on plants for a few days, he needed protein for long-term survival, so Mike decided to lay a gill net in the shallows and then look for other food. Mike, a former Air Force survival instructor, was skilled in survival techniques. He joined the challenge to prove he still had it and to win the $1 million prize. After walking along the coastline, he was shocked to find fresh bear feces everywhere. Desmond, after seeing this, decided to sabotage a tool out of frustration, while Mike was excited to find food. The next contestant, named Justin, was once an experienced ace sniper. Many of his comrades suffered from PTSD after retiring. To help, he founded a wilderness survival team, hoping it would ease psychological issues. Today is his 5th day in the challenge. While searching for food along the coastline, he spotted a duck in the distance. He wasn't very hungry yet and decided to let it fatten before eating it. The camera then moves to Mary. After modifying her tent, it finally became waterproof. Seeing that the rain outside wasn't too severe, she decided to start building a camp kitchen. In such a damp environment, surviving without a fire source and wood is difficult. She first chopped notches in 2 large trees, inserted logs, covered them with a waterproof cloth, and surrounded it with stones to create a fire pit for cooking. Now, she only needed to focus on finding food. Back to Justin, he had been scouting the forest for a long time but couldn't find any signs of food or animals. It seemed he had to rely on aquatic sources for food. He decided to check for ducks again and unexpectedly found one dead. Approaching, he saw no bite marks or blood. He suspected it drowned, but had no proof, so the likely cause was disease. This left Justin in a dilemma. Eating it could be dangerous, and leaving it could attract mountain lions and bears. After much thought, he decided to take it far from the camp and give it a water burial, which was quite touching. Meanwhile, Mike's fishing net did not disappoint him. From a distance, he saw a rockfish hanging on it. Even more exciting, before he could boast, he found 2 larger flounders on the net. This lucky start made him ecstatic. In this $1 million survival challenge, protein is as valuable as gold. Even after 6 days of hunger, he only dared to eat 1 fish. He dug a pit on a nearby beach, placed the cooked fish inside, and covered it with a layer of moss and seaweed to mask the smell from black bears. The soil's temperature was around 10 degrees Celsius, so it should preserve the fish for 2 days. On the other hand, Randy was having a tough time boiling hemlock leaves to stave off hunger. As the saying goes, live off the land or sea, but he was not skilled in water. He focused all his energy on land. For this, he set several figure-4 traps, known for their high sensitivity and hit rate. After finding the right spot in the forest, he quickly set up the traps using wood. The outcome would be determined over time. Before the competition, Randy was a survival instructor with extensive experience in outdoor survival, hunting, and building. He joined the challenge mainly to win $3 million so he could propose to his girlfriend. Hopefully, he will achieve his goal. The next contestant, named David, shared some life philosophy at the start, mainly due to his profession. David is a veteran pastor of 15 years and has also served as a survival coach. His 3 adopted children are his motivation in life. Being single for many years, he has no attachments and only wants to win the competition to provide a better life for his children. He has already secured his shelter. and now the most important task is finding food. Therefore, David decided to make a fishing device. He used a rope found 2 days ago, attached 4 fish hooks to one end, tied the other end to a tree, and added a stone as a sinker before throwing it into the water, hoping to catch some fish. On the 6th day of the survival challenge, Randy eagerly checked his traps, only to find mixed feelings. He was glad the trap was triggered, indicating animal activity nearby, but disappointed as he continued to starve. Besides eating some mushrooms, he hadn't had any other food. Without protein, his body wouldn't last long in the competition. Back at his shelter, while splitting wood, he considered trying to get food from the water. On the 7th day, while other contestants were already preserving fish, David was still relying on seaweed. He had set up a fishing device 2 days ago and went to check it today, only to find nothing but a clump of seaweed, and one of his fish hooks was missing. If he couldn't catch fish soon to supplement his protein intake, he might lose out on the $1 million prize. Meanwhile, Mary decided to add a windproof door to her shelter because it might be noisy at night. She secured a log to an A-frame, collected some shrub leaves from the forest, and stacked them on the wood to create a door that shields from wind and rain. To ensure the door stayed above the ground when opened, she made a tripod out of branches. After hurriedly testing the door, which now had a grass curtain and a full-view skylight, it was unclear if it was warm, but it certainly felt safer. On the 7th day, Randy discovered his fire striker was missing, a crucial survival tool. He quickly reviewed yesterday's video footage and confirmed his worst fear. He had accidentally left it in the fire. Magnesium, used in strikers, has a very low ignition point and melts away once it touches fire. In this constantly wet and rainy environment, starting a fire without a striker is extremely difficult. It's uncertain if he can continue in these conditions. The scene shifts back to Mary. Every day she looks at her daughter's photo, which motivates her to survive. The first thing she does after waking up is to make a fire to boil water, since she hasn't managed to get any other food. While tending the fire, Mary passionately argues that life should not just be about enjoyment because it's short, but about striving hard. She's here not just for the prize money, but also to set a good example for her children, teaching them to be strong and brave. Perhaps too engrossed in her talk, she accidentally cuts her hand while chopping wood and loses sensation in her thumb. If the axe had hit the artery, she could permanently lose function within 4 to 6 hours. Mary quickly retrieves her first aid kit, but her fingers tremble either from pain or nerves as she tries to open the zipper. Unable to bear it, she presses the rescue button. "Oh, where are you? Hurry up, buddy," she calls out anxiously. After a tense 15-minute wait, the rescue team arrives and immediately instructs her to keep her hand raised to stem the bleeding. After a quick assessment, they confirm the cut is deep and insist she must be taken to a hospital immediately, meaning Mary has to leave the competition. She never thought she'd be defeated by herself in such a brutal challenge, where contestants face not just survival issues, but also unexpected forced retirements. Hopefully, Mary's hand heals soon. With Mary's exit, only 8 contestants remain. Larry takes the role of a safety expert, emphasizing the importance of wearing protective gear to avoid injuries from axes or saws. He talks at length, probably because he can't think of what else to say, and then excuses himself, claiming he is thirsty. Today, he plans to move again. Not because he dislikes his current shelter, but because the nearby stream is too noisy. During a previous scouting, he found 2 fallen cedars, an ideal place to settle. To make navigating the slope easier, he drives some stakes into the ground. He then dismantles the tarp from his old shelter and lays it over the beams at the new site, planning to find some logs for support. However, while climbing, a branch flips him over, instantly frustrating him. He takes out his anger on it, cursing at the situation. Since Randy lost his flint, he has started gathering materials to make a bow drill. First, he needs to find a soft, dry fireboard. The best way is to use the moisture in ground depressions. Next, he scrapes some bark to make tinder. Then he chops a branch to make a drill spindle. Using shoelaces, he makes the bow. He adds the pumice stone he found earlier. Now, all tools are ready. It's time to test their effectiveness. The pumice stone stabilizes the spindle while the bowstring provides power. He also carves a V-notch in the fireboard. Besides oxygen, temperature, and fuel, the most important elements are strong perseverance and confidence. In theory, this should start a fire. By now, Randy's hands are nearly raw, yet he only produces smoke without flames. He blames the stone's excessive resistance and decides to find a more suitable one. If he fails to start a fire next time, he might have to give up the $1 million prize. The camera moves to Joseph, who has made a digging stick from a wooden stick. With it, he can dig up some useful items. Joseph is digging up spruce roots, not for food due to hunger, but to make a bellows. Spruce roots are excellent materials in the wild. He digs them up, peels them, and soaks them in water to increase their flexibility. Soon he has sturdy ropes. With these ropes, he constructs the bellows tube, an essential tool for keeping a fire alive in the wild. Joseph lives in the Yukon Valley, teaching survival skills to others. The various items in his home attest to his expertise. His extensive travels and learning from local indigenous people have enriched his experience. This challenge is a test of his skills and a chance to win a $1 million prize. Soon, he hollows out 2 logs and neatly joins them. He uses the soaked ropes to securely tie them. Finally, he shapes one end into a round head, completing the bellows. Testing it on a fire, the effect is indeed good. This device isn't just for blowing fire. It also helps alleviate loneliness in his spare time, though his skills may not be great. The camera then moves to Tracy, who today plans to set a gill net for fishing. She hasn't set the net for a week because she hasn't settled on a permanent camp and wanted to try fishing. So far, she hasn't seen even a hint of fish, which reminds her of the gill net. To prevent it from tearing during transport, she carefully rolled it around a branch. No sooner had she placed it in the water than she started shouting at something in the distance. "Hey, hey, hey, go away!" I thought Big Bear had come to visit her again, but she said she was just practicing. She's not worried about bears or wolves, as her size wouldn't allow them to eat her quickly. She fears cougars, the stealthy assassins, because before you realize it, it's too late. The final contestant is truly impressive. Nicole made grass taste like beef jerky. She's a professor of medicinal botany and also a primitive survival skills instructor. Survival skills are second nature to her. 15 years ago, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and at times couldn't even walk. She managed to alleviate her symptoms using herbs she collected herself. She joined this wilderness solitude challenge to push her limits, though it's also for the money. Her shelter is nearly complete. Today, she plans to add more branches for insulation. In the wild, she has a special skill, using bird calls to gather information about her surroundings. Her bird watching and identification skills are exceptional. It must be said, this girl really has some skills. Looking forward to her next spectacular performance. Tracy's moment to pull up the net has finally arrived. Hearing her giggling, you know for sure the net caught some fish. Unexpectedly, she got a 2-for-1 deal, catching a crab along with the fish, which nearly made her jump for joy. After eating grass for a week, she finally gets to eat meat. Back at camp, she quickly sets up a pot over a fire. Under the cover of thick smoke, no wild animals on the island come to steal her food. She enjoys her first seafood feast, modest in calories but hugely satisfying. She's one step closer to the $3 million prize. Over to Randy. His fire-starting attempts have yet to succeed. If he can't start a fire today, he'll have to give up the challenge and head home. This time, he found a stone in a natural depression, determined to succeed or die trying. Using a bow drill, he frantically rubs it against the wood. After several failures and near breakdowns, finally, after 71 minutes of friction, he produces a spark. Carefully, Randy transfers it to some tinder and blows it into a flame, reigniting his hope. Now, he just needs to keep the fire going to survive until the end. Meanwhile, Nicole is having a much more enjoyable time. If you understand that life is so long, humming a tune while decorating her house is quite leisurely. Suddenly, an animal noise nearby catches her attention, and she's infuriated. She must see who's disturbing her leisure. It's so strange. It sounds like, oh my God, a bear. Nicole is not scared, but excited, because black bears usually stay in their territory unless there's salmon they like. This is definitely good news for Nicole. She figures the bear hasn't caught any fish and must be eating grass like her. She thinks she'll show the bear how to fish someday. The scene switches to Tracy. Suddenly awakened from her sleep, she hears a familiar call. It must be the bear, Big Bear, looking for her again. Frightened, Tracy immediately makes noises to scare it away. "Go away," she says. Instead, her voice draws Big Bear closer. It even comes behind her and starts sniffing around. Who could stand this situation? Tracy grabs her bear deterrent horn and blasts it. "Leave this place, leave! Did you hear me? Leave!" Unexpectedly, Big Bear has brought its cub along. Seeing the father and son drooling, Tracy lights a flare and charges at them. All 10 contestants have now appeared on screen. With 2 already eliminated, 8 remain. They include Tracy, who is constantly bothered by Big Bear, Joseph, the craftsman making bellows, Randy, struggling with his fire-starting stick, David, the elderly pastor who likes to discuss life philosophy, Larry, who's quick to argue with tree trunks, Justin, who gave a duck a water burial, and Mike, who is on his 8th day in the competition. Last night, Mike dreamed of a beauty kissing him and thought it was his wife, but woke up to find a slug instead. It's so funny that it could make your dentures fall out. How big is his psychological shadow from this? Can anyone help calculate that? After reminiscing, Mike went to the storage room and grabbed a stick. His netting has been fruitful lately, especially as Vancouver Island is a tropical rainforest with average humidity often around 70%. If he doesn't store dry firewood, starting a fire will be difficult. Finally busy, he made his rack. He likes everything organized neatly. Even the slightest mess makes him anxious. He even categorized the wood into 3 types. It's an irresistible feeling. If he were a woman, I would have to take him in. After preparing the wood drying rack, Mike sets out to make a suspended stove to protect his back and alleviate loneliness. He drives 4 trimmed stakes into the ground, then ties crossbeams on both sides to stabilize it. After ensuring the rack is secure, he collects some small stones to lay on top to prevent the stove surface from burning. Once done, he lights a bonfire and cooks a pot of fish soup. Life is quite comfortable for him. Before eating, Mike insists on washing his hands, so let me introduce his washstand. It's made from trash collected on the beach, old ropes, a plastic bucket, and wood sticks. He's crafted it into a semi-automatic system with a pedal switch that feels just like driving a car. It must be said, his craftsmanship is truly exceptional. This is definitely the most modern and well-equipped camp since this wilderness solitude show began. If he could bring his wife over, they could probably build a tribe. Larry's situation is tough. Although he has set up fishing nets and lines, he hasn't seen even a hint of a fish. So he decides to make a spear to take a more active approach. He plans to use it as a harpoon at low tide and as a weapon in the wild. But his constant hunger makes even small tasks exhausting, and he has to keep checking his nets while working. He is busy until dusk, but the outcome remains unknown. Switching to Tracy, she previously encountered 2 bears and realized one was a cub. Fearing the mother bear might retaliate or feeling too guilty, she cries like a 300-pound child and decides to quit the challenge. She feels she has been too harsh on the bear cub, which is perhaps the most unusual reason for quitting. Regardless, surviving unharmed is the real treasure, as having money but no life to spend it is the ultimate pain. Finally, Larry's net catches something. After a week of barely eating, his saliva alone could drown a fish. However, the fish he was about to eat disappears, blowing his mind like popcorn. He's sick of eating seashells and snails from the beach and pins his hopes on his fishing gear. Fortunately, he hears a laugh from afar. His fishing gear has made a catch, ensuring he won't go hungry. He quickly gives the fish a physical passage and hears more noise just as he stands up. Overwhelmed by this sudden happiness, he can't help but shout out loud, calling himself over. After handling the fish, he places it temporarily on the shore and checks another fishing setup. Luckily, there's another catch, doubling his hope. If this continues, winning the $1 million prize is still possible. The focus then shifts to David, who is also confused from hunger. He survives by dreaming daily. After failing to find food on the beach, he relies on his fishing net, which disappoints him greatly with not even a trace of fish, only the noise of the sea breeze, which seems to praise the fishing spot. David thinks the net's mouth is too small, causing fish to bounce off. Anxious on his way back, a sudden inspiration strikes. If one net doesn't work, he'll try 2. He believes this will surely catch a fish. The ropes he found a few days ago come in handy, as he splits them into finer lines and takes out a fishing shuttle he made earlier. After some planning, he starts working. Weaving the net isn't physically demanding, but his intense hunger makes it difficult. After 3 days without food, his body starts to break down muscle for energy. Unfortunately, he runs out of rope halfway through and, exhausted, must wait to find more rope to continue. On day 9 of the survival challenge, Nicole adds another entry to her wilderness diary. Although she can find some food on the nearby beach, it's not enough for long-term survival. So, she decides to use a wooden stick to set up a net, choosing a location where black bears are known to roam. As the saying goes, no venturing into the bear's den, no chance of catching fish. It's the salmon spawning season, and if timed well, there could be plenty of fish. This is her first time setting up a net, and she's just mimicking what she's seen. Before she can secure the net properly, the tide rises and soaks her shoes. She quickly makes do and leaves the rest to luck. Justin hasn't eaten for a week. Wearing a small leather skirt and carrying a fire stick at his waist, he eagerly checks the net. Luckily, there's a fish, an ugly ratfish, named for its rat-like tail and capable of growing over half a meter long. When asked why his net is so coarse, Justin says it's made from a modified hammock, a habit of thinking he developed during his service. Every tool must serve more than one purpose. He quickly processes the fish and rushes back to camp to eat. The camera switches to David, who is facing severe dehydration. He had been drinking rootless water, provided by nature, but several sunny days disrupted his routine. He has no choice but to laboriously boil water for drinking. To start a fire in the extremely damp environment, crushed cedar bark is an excellent tinder. After gathering some and mixing them, he easily starts a fire with a fire striker. Tonight's low tide is a good opportunity to set up a net. He wants to quickly resolve his dehydration issue and gather more food with the net he's woven. Unfortunately, while adding firewood, he accidentally tips over the pot, nearly losing his temper on camera, but he holds back. In the wilderness, the biggest fears are hypothermia and dehydration. The human body starts to fail after 3 days without water. With this in mind, David has to restart the fire and boil water again. At night, he reflects on himself in the shelter, regretting not listening to his father's fishing advice when he was young. Meanwhile, Larry is quite comfortable. He threads the fish slices he cut onto a skewer for grilling and makes soup from the remaining fish bones, which he will drink the next morning. He neatly organizes the whole fish, and today, he has caught a total of 4 fish, marking a successful step in the challenge. On the 10th day of the survival challenge, Nicole finally reaches the moment to check her fishing net. Unexpectedly, a large bear had the same idea, and even brought its family to one side of the net. With no other option, Nicole tries to persuade them to leave. "Hey, bear, someone's here. Hi, don't worry, you're very safe." In her quest for food, she decides to take a few steps forward, but the bear immediately becomes aggressive. Nicole abandons the fish and runs for her life. After a night of anxious waiting, she returns to the shore early in the morning. Today, she chooses to walk around the territory of the black bears, not out of fear, but to avoid startling them. Just as she says this, she exclaims, "Oh my, it's huge!" Hanging on the net is a massive catch, measuring over half a meter. To prevent the net from tearing during the struggle, Nicole throws stones at it. Unexpectedly, this creature is quite stubborn, requiring a bit of a neck massage to finally calm down. A bear's sense of smell is 1,000 times stronger than a human's, so she needs to quickly process the catch and bring it back to camp before the bears come looking for a meal. It's a dog salmon, commonly known as chum salmon. The males have distinctive canine teeth and swim upstream every year to find a mate, yet this one couldn't escape the woman's net. Now, not only will the fish be eaten, but the tools of the crime are also confiscated. Nicole, while processing the fish and keeping a lookout, manages to secure it before the bears arrive. Having been hungry for a long time, she is eager to eat. Part of it is used for a fried fish feast, and the rest is smoked for preservation. She won't have to starve for the next few days. The moment the fish hits her mouth, she is completely satisfied. Delicious! Oh my, I can't believe I'm eating this here. Meanwhile, things are bleak for David. His net was twisted into knots by the waves. He has barely eaten in about a week and feels dizzy whenever he stands up. Relying on seaweed and shellfish, his body is barely holding up. He starts thinking about quitting, but remembering how often he has to deny his children's requests for purchases, David decides to persevere. aiming to win the $3 million prize and change his fate. The camera then turns to Justin, who is really enjoying himself. While other contestants are desperately searching for food, he's swinging from trees like Tarzan, claiming that happiness promotes the secretion of endorphins, a hormone that enhances creativity. Consequently, he builds an outdoor gym, complete with a 2-kilometer weight-carrying track and pull-up bars, essentially all the amenities of an indoor gym. While others desperately conserve energy, he recklessly expends it. If he wins the championship, I will stop updating my account from today. Today is Randy's 12th day in the challenge. Having managed to start a fire by friction, he now focuses on building a shelter. Although it's a big project, the shelter will protect him from the severe cold of the upcoming winter and from attacks by black bears or wolves, allowing him to survive longer on the island and possibly outlast the other contestants. Randy is at his physical limit. If he can't get food from traps and fishing lines soon, he'll need to find a new food source. After much effort, the walls are finally up, looking quite good overall. The roof will wait another 2 days. Right now, he needs to find food urgently. The scene switches to David, who is observing sea otters swimming leisurely and wishes he could train them to fish for him. Spotting fish under the seaweed, although small, he decides they are better than nothing. He prepares his fishing gear with a stick, hook, line, and sea snail bait, and begins a long wait. After many changes of fishing spots and half a day without a catch, it seems like divine intervention when he finally hooks a fish. Yes, baby, that's great. This fish is huge. For David, who has been surviving on seaweed for a week, this fish is a godsend. Before eating, he prays silently, then enjoys a hearty fish soup. On day 12 of the challenge, Nicole notices the temperature dropping fast. Predicting a change in weather by observing the night sky, she decides to fortify her shelter immediately by installing a large door. She stacks cut logs at the doorway and secures them with rope, then insulates with branches to maximize protection. Sure enough, soon the sky is filled with dark clouds and fierce winds. Her accurate prediction spares her from being blown over just as she steps out to check her fishing net. The area around her net is flooded, forcing her to wait and see. Back with David, the storm is fierce, with waves crashing against the rocks and quickly flooding his kitchen. Watching his beloved kitchen tools being swept away, he realizes the harsh reality of nature. The survival conditions are becoming increasingly brutal. While others have managed to eat chum salmon, if his traps remain empty, he might have to resort to less desirable food. When he eagerly checks his traps, he finds the bait stolen without triggering the trap, indicating a need to increase sensitivity. Randy then checks another trap and finally sees the long-awaited sight. A mouse under a rock has turned into mouse chips, his first meat in half a month, more exciting than seeing his wife. He rushes back to camp to prepare a barbecue. Although the small amount of meat isn't filling, it's much better than eating seaweed and slugs. The crispy and charred flavor is so good that he savors every bit, including the mouse teeth, hoping for more substantial food soon. As this is hardly enough, the scene shifts to Joseph. The churning sea fills him with anxiety. His net, vital for food, might be swept away by the waves. He decides to brave the storm and save it. Reaching the shore, he finds it covered in seaweed. He must enter the water to manage it, or the resistance will be too much, and it will be lost. He works in the icy water until dark, unexpectedly catching a salmon and seemingly lifting a crab with his left hand. This catch is far better than Randy's mouse chips. Outside, the storm rages, but inside, he enjoys a delicious meal. It must be said, chopsticks are a survival tool. If he can catch more salmon during the run, the $1 million prize will be much easier to secure. The focus turns to Justin, definitely the comedian of the season. He lifts weights outdoors when full and drinks the wind when hungry. He planned to build a raft and fish at sea, but the next second, a fierce wind hits, and the cold rain smacks his face. He can't surf the waves now, so he hurries back to camp. You have to admire his attitude. With the storm outside, looking for food is impossible. He can only lie there and share war stories, recalling times in a small cave with comrades, using plastic bags for emergencies. So he decides to make a urinal. He takes a hollow kelp and sticks it in the door crack, extending his drainage tool so he no longer needs to go outside. With his back to the camera for so long, one has to wonder what he's really up to. Despite figuring out the bear's habits, fate is unstoppable. Nicole steps out and encounters them. She says danger and opportunity coexist. Where there are bears, there are big fish. She quickly takes it and leaves. Nicole gives a neck massage to a lively big fish, bigger than the last one. This area indeed has good resources. This is what you call seeking fortune amidst danger. The black bear looks back at her as if to say, "This lady may be fit, but she's too lean. Let her fatten up before striking." After Nicole swiftly slices the fish, she looks at a pot full of protein, very pleased. At this rate, not just surviving 2 months but settling permanently wouldn't be a problem. Survival Challenge Day 15. Morning, 7 contestants remain on the island. After completing his modern campsite, Mike discovered a natural toilet near the kitchen. It's ergonomically designed with a natural seat cushion, an essential piece of survival furniture. You probably know what Mike uses for toilet paper. After showcasing the toilet, Mike headed to the beach to scavenge. He intended to collect a few plastic bottles for storing fish, but found a large plastic box instead. Normally considered trash, it's a valuable tool here. By adding an outboard bracket, it becomes a boat. It's the salmon spawning season, a perfect time to fish in deep waters. Catching salmon could make winning the $1 million prize much easier. After some work, the boat was ready. Whether it will sink remains to be seen after testing. The sea is still rough, but Mike wants to take the risk. Success means a feast. Failure means quitting and going home. Surprisingly, the boat was stable in the water, exciting Mike. He couldn't resist dancing a disco on it, exclaiming, "Look at this, I can still dance." As the first boat builder of the season, he's eager to conquer the sea. By evening, Larry felt cursed, constantly followed by rats wherever he went. His frustration peaked when he finally caught a fish at dawn, nearly losing it. Returning to camp to start a fire, he found the fire starter wet and swore loudly, causing the editor to mute the entire scene. At 2 a.m., he finally started a fire, but then hit his head on a beam. Frustrated, he decided to check on other contestants. Randy was relieved to stop eating rats since his fishing gear worked. He caught a mackerel, a relative of sharks, and found another on a different line. Delighted with 2 fish, he decided to fish a bit longer. Soon, he caught a third, finally enjoying a full meal after half a month of hunger. Thinking back to the stormy nights spent building a shelter on an empty stomach, he had almost wanted to quit and give up the $1 million prize. Though he had caught a few rats, they weren't enough. Now, with his food problem solved, all the hardships seemed worthwhile. Survival Challenge. Day 16th. Joseph's thoughts align completely with Mike's. He believes the valley is full of migrating salmon and wants to venture into deep waters by boat to make a big catch. However, unlike Mike, who found a large box to convert into a boat, Joseph is less fortunate. He has to start from scratch, cutting small trees and gradually building his vessel. He has collected a lot of rope recently and just needs to construct the boat's frame and cover it with waterproof fabric to set sail. If he can catch the salmon migration, winning the $1 million prize is almost guaranteed. Unfortunately, due to his deep involvement or possibly selecting the wrong materials, his boat breaks with a snap. Joseph feels understandably frustrated as time waits for no one, and missing this opportunity could mean no second chance. Meanwhile, Larry is on the verge of a breakdown. Rats constantly follow him, even at night, and have chewed through his backpack and equipment. In a fit of rage, he swears to level the ground if they dare touch his sleeping bag, even if it means forfeiting the prize. His campsite is littered with fallen trees, and living in such a confined space could be damaging his cerebral cortex. The added stress from the rat's constant presence is too much, and he breaks down, sitting on the ground in tears. He knows he struggles to control his emotions but never expected the challenge to be this tough. Thinking of his family and the $3 million prize, he decides to endure. Nicole, although not worried about food or drink, feels very lonely. Looking at the vultures overhead and the distant sea, she recalls her adopted son who vanished while swimming 2 years ago, just after she earned her PhD. The search ended in tragedy, the deepest pain of her life. But with other children to care for and plenty of fish meat, she sees a good chance of winning the championship. Randy's shelter is the most luxurious so far. While other contestants finished their basic huts early on, he spent over half a month building his, not out of laziness, but to make it sturdier. He believes it not only keeps him warm, but also helps pass the time and combat loneliness. After all, The 2-month solitary ordeal tests more than just survival skills. Overcoming loneliness is the hardest part. Now that his food issues are resolved, he begins constructing a luxury wilderness bed. The solid wood frame and natural pine needle mattress are top tier in wilderness survival. Once he lays the waterproof sleeping bag on top, the bed is complete. Lying down, loneliness and cold instantly engulf him. He knew the challenge would be tough, but reality has proven even harsher. The next day, to ease his depression, Randy wanders near the coast, but his loneliness only deepens. After some contemplation in the jungle, it seems he has made a decision. The camera shifts to Larry, who has been completely overrun by rats. Unable to outswear or catch them, he reluctantly decides to move again. He packs up his gear and heads into the jungle, where the dense bushes make walking difficult. Soon, his knees start to ache, and after cursing and searching for over 2 hours, he finally finds an ideal spot. Almost moved to tears, he sees plenty of dry wood for fire and many edible chicken fat mushrooms. With the sea nearby, he can fish when hungry and relax on the beach when tired. Changing locations really made a difference. Soon, he finds a piece of hemp rope by the shore, which he uses to start building a shelter with a double A-frame and crossbeams. Free from the rats, Larry works with great enthusiasm. He quickly constructs the basic structure and plans to add extra ribs for strength. However, after several attempts, each piece of wood is just a bit too short, with the final one lacking only 4 centimeters, which frustrates yet amuses him. Larry thought this spot would be a geomantic treasure, making the $3 million prize within easy reach. However, reality proves otherwise. Though large chicken fat mushrooms are abundant, they are not enough. He needs to secure large game or fish to survive. The local tides should help with fishing, but a check of his nets and fishing gear shows not even a trace of fish. It looks like he'll be having mussel mushroom soup. On day 20 of the survival challenge, Joseph is busy building a boat to catch the salmon migration. He has constructed the gunnel and is now adding ribs made from the readily available and durable cedar wood. The manual bending process is complex, and a slight mishap can lead to breaks, but he is meticulous in sizing and placement. Although the structure seems fragile, securing each joint well and wrapping it in waterproof fabric should make it seaworthy. He hopes his efforts pay off. Otherwise, survival will be challenging. That evening, Larry starts cooking dinner, making a fire in a tree hollow for better ventilation. Disappointed by not catching any fish during the day, he's still quite satisfied, especially since there are no rats. Unexpectedly, the next morning he wakes to see smoke rising from the tree, and he rushes to douse it with water. The fire has cleared the area around his shelter, and he's lucky it's been raining, or the show could have ended right there. Whether he can win the $3 million is uncertain, but at least he's had a close call with a free cremation. The camera moves to Big Boss Mike. He not only made a small boat from a box, but also has a modern campsite with all the necessary facilities. He is self-sufficient in terms of food, but these are just the basics. In the last 2 days, Mike crafted a bow and arrow and built a pyramid trap from solid wood. Now he is developing on land, sea, and air. After satisfying material needs, he focuses on mental aspects. For this, Mike decides to create a board game. He carves 2 dice with a knife, then collects stones and shells for game pieces. While playing, he passionately comments on the game. When hungry, he eats seaweed sashimi. When tired, he plays bowling on the beach. The survival show turns into a vacation for him. His only regret is the lack of companionship, making him feel empty and miss his wife. The camera then switches to Randy. Recently, he too has struggled with loneliness. To alleviate this, he decides to build a sauna. He starts by planting cedar sticks in the ground to form a circle, bends the tops to secure them together, and then covers it with a waterproof fabric held down by stones. With the dome-shaped sauna complete, he heats stones until they are scorching, then pours water over them to create steam. Once everything is ready, Randy steps inside to enjoy. If not for his enchanting singing, one might worry he'd die of comfort inside. Allegedly, this is a native method of spiritual cleansing. After the sauna, he feels transcended, as if his soul had left his body. The scene shifts to David, who is utterly bewildered by hunger. He's been supported solely by his willpower, having not eaten for 4 days. Today, putting on socks took him 20 minutes. He must find food today, despite the rough seas, and tries very hard to show it. After 20 days of empty fishing nets, he places his hopes on a fishing rod, but after a long time, he catches nothing and reluctantly returns to camp to rest. Justin is in an even worse situation, having experienced a wilderness waterbed. The water isn't from the sea or self-produced, but because his shelter is built on a swamp. The pit he used for making fire can now breed fish, and his down sleeping bag is completely wet. With an innocent look, he curses as he removes everything soaked. Seeing his shelter turned into a water room makes Justin furious, yet he can't dry his damp sleeping bag. Without the sleeping bag to keep warm at night, he might not make it through the day. To solve this, he comes up with a good idea. He goes to the kitchen and roasts the outer layer by the campfire, while the inner layer is dried using his body heat. Now, his challenge is not only survival, but also suppressing the desire to quit. On day 21 of the survival challenge, the crew's speedboat is approaching fast. It seems someone can't continue and wants to quit. I thought it might be Randy or Justin, but surprisingly, it's Big Boss Mike. His withdrawal is unexpected. Living in a well-equipped modern campsite and occasionally enjoying seafood feasts, it's hard to understand why he would quit. Mike's reason is that he misses his wife. Having been away so long, she must be suffering. Before she learns of his quitting, he plans to arrange a surprise for her. With Mike's regrettable withdrawal, 6 contestants remain on the island. David, driven by unbearable hunger, finally resorts to eating mussels. Overeating could be lethal, but David is too hungry to care and takes the risk. Although tasty, the mussels provide little relief from his hunger. His hopes now rest on the fishing net, which is nearing completion. David imagines hearing the sound of fish splashing as he finishes making the net. He hurriedly heads to the shore to cast it, doubling the nets and weighting the bottom with stones to improve accuracy, using minced meat as bait. If this doesn't work, he might as well pack up and go home. The scene shifts to Justin. Since his shelter turned into a water room, he can't afford to waste time. If he doesn't act soon, the $1 million prize will slip away. Hoping the fishing net might catch some fish, he checks it only to find it empty. He decides to convert the fishing net back into a hammock. Though it reduces his food options, at least he'll have a decent sleep. Justin considered moving, but with no food found recently, he lacks the energy to build anew. Back at the shelter, he secures the hammock and tests it. It works well despite the strong, fishy smell. The next morning, Justin starts to wander again. In memory of a fallen comrade, he plans to climb the mountain behind him, hoping it will inspire him to keep going. He prepares thoroughly for the climb, carrying extra water since there's no food. However, due to low atmospheric pressure on the island, he struggles to boil water. Just as the water shows signs of boiling, he accidentally knocks over the pot. Frustrated, he curses at the camera. At this point, Randy's morale also collapses. He thought a sauna might improve his mood, but he still can't find a reason to continue, struggling with the thought of giving up a $3 million prize. After much hesitation, he finally makes the call to quit. This outcome might have been anticipated, but considering he lost his fire starter and still lasted this long is commendable. If he had focused on sourcing food from the water initially, he might have lasted longer. Unfortunately, he concentrated on land-based resources. After Randy's departure, only 5 contestants remain, marking the intense final phase of the challenge. Today, Nicole went to check the fishing net at the beach and unexpectedly encountered a black bear waiting nearby. In previous seasons, contestants might have already taken action, but Nicole, who didn't bring a bow and arrow, preferred to eat grass for 2 months to make it to the end. Moreover, the bear was a male, and any misstep could have been dangerous. Fortunately, the bear, a good family man, was just looking for food. After circling the net and finding no fish, he walked towards Nicole. He seemed to say, "Sister, your net has no fish either. Why not come over to my place?" Nicole was so scared her heart almost jumped out, fearing a surprise attack at night. However, after a peaceful night, Nicole came early the next morning to collect the net and saw a dog salmon hanging on it. The resources here are truly excellent. Since bears could intercept her at any time, she quickly processed the fish and returned to camp for breakfast. Lately, Nicole has been catching big fish daily and got tired of it, so she decided to pick some wild vegetables for a change. To avoid encountering the bear, she made noise while walking. Suddenly, she stopped. It was remains left by the bear. a delicacy for others. But Nicole was fed up with fish. She walked towards the stream and was startled to see a large number of dog salmon spawning. It was a direct hit into the salmon's den. If she had caught and smoked the fish, winning the $3 million would have been easy. However, Nicole didn't even look and focused on finding grass. As a botany expert, she quickly found plants with antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties that could also remove body odor. Nearby, she found plantain, which tastes similar to spinach, ensuring she had greens for dinner. On the 22nd day of the survival challenge, Joseph finally finished the keel of his boat. Next, he needed to cover it. Native North Americans typically use animal skins, but here he had to use waterproof fabric instead. A few days ago, he found a sea lion bone which became flexible after soaking. It was perfect for making a bone needle, making sewing the boat's skin much easier. After careful crafting, the basic shape of the bone needle was done. Next, he kept sharpening it to make it sharp. To prevent the boat's fabric from being cut during collisions, Joseph specially added bumpers to the boat. His needlework was indeed impressive. As for how the boat performs once in the water, it might very well capsize. The scene shifts to David. Even though he has 2 nets set up, he hasn't caught a single fish so far. Hunger and loneliness are nearly driving him mad. He even made his handsaw feel like a lightsaber. When it was finally time to check the nets, both were still curled up with nothing but seaweed. But nature's gifts didn't stop there. It also brought him a half-ton yellow cedar tree. If it accidentally hit the net, all his efforts would have been in vain. Moving it by hand was unrealistic, so he had to rely on the tide. David tied it up with a rope, only to see another drift over soon after. It seems he was in for a struggle with the logs today. The camera moves to Justin. Didn't he say he was going to climb a mountain yesterday? Surprisingly, he really started his perilous journey. The jungle's slipperiness and dense bushes made walking extremely difficult. Despite his caution, he still fell hard. After getting up, he felt his knee pain, which would likely swell soon. But as a veteran, this pain couldn't defeat him. When he reached about 300 meters altitude, the area was full of slippery rocks and moss. A slight misstep could have been disastrous, but he successfully reached the summit without mishap. Overwhelmed by the distant views, he said this was not only to honor fallen comrades, but also to inspire those at their lowest. He hoped they wouldn't give up and face the difficulties, for the most beautiful views lie ahead. One might think Justin would quit after descending, but he started relocating his shelter instead. It must be said, this guy is really resilient. At this point, he seemed unstoppable, as if he had taken nitrogen. Even a few more days without food wouldn't be a problem. After dismantling the entire shelter, he carried the logs to the new campsite. To save time, he decided to build a lean-to. Its triangular structure was not only sturdy but also labor-saving. Once the shelter's frame was done, he eagerly tied the hammock to the beam. Now, he didn't have to worry about flooding. Lying in it, he tested it out, and it wasn't bad. If he could find food next, he should be able to hold on for a while. On the 23rd day of the challenge, David checked his nets again. His mood was as tangled as his nets. If he hadn't considered that he was a pastor, he would have been cursing loudly. Once his emotions settled, he could only take the nets back to camp for repairs. After all, this was his only hope for survival. David admitted he had never handled nets before and had learned much from previous shows. He couldn't understand why fishing was so easy for others, and why his attempt at copying them was so difficult. Another contestant might have broken down by now, but David's attitude remained positive. After working most of the day, the net was finally repaired. David set it back in its original place, hoping to catch a big fish next time. Otherwise, he might not last much longer. The camera turns to Nicole. Her fishing nets almost never fail. Today, she caught a big mahi-mahi. It's like comparing products. Some just have to be thrown away. It's like comparing people. Some just have to be outdone. Perhaps because she ate too much fish recently, Nicole decided to release this one. Seeing this, I really wanted to go up to her. A survival show, and she's releasing fish. David would probably be furious if he knew. Just yesterday, she ignored a big fish, and today she threw back one he had caught. Does this woman have mines at home? On day 24 of the survival challenge, David's worst fear happened. A huge driftwood hit his fishing net. He had just repaired it yesterday, And today, it was sacrificed again. After more than 20 days without catching a fish, David couldn't hold back his tears. At that moment, he really wanted to pack up and go home. But thinking of his 3 children at home, he couldn't give up this precious opportunity. He made a resolution to not withdraw no matter what, unless the show team persuaded him. Hopefully, David can turn things around. A month passed in a blink of an eye. Joseph's small boat was finally built. Due to the weak hull, it was named Delicate. As the saying goes, you'll know whether it's a mule or a horse when you take it out for a walk. If the small boat can sail smoothly and fish to prevent hypothermia from falling into the water, Joseph wore a life jacket before getting into the water. Next was the long-awaited trial sailing. Unexpectedly, as soon as he got into the water, the boat was terribly shaky. He barely paddled a few strokes and almost capsized. It was too shaky. Joseph hurriedly paddled back to shore. It seems he really needs to install an external support. Hopefully, he can find suitable materials on the island. Otherwise, he might really miss the salmon migration. The camera moves to Larry. His situation isn't optimistic either. He thought changing camps would be smooth sailing. Instead, his fishing nets and fishing gear caught no fish. More infuriatingly, the rats came looking for him again, and almost added black goji berries to his pot. Fortunately, they haven't disrupted his sleep yet. Otherwise, he would have to move again. So, he decided to set some traps to punish them. Although there wasn't much meat, it was still better than eating grass. This was Larry's first time making traps. It took him over 2 hours to set it up. A classic 4-character trigger structure held up a rock with some periwinkle meat underneath as bait. If a rat came, it would instantly become rat slices. Everything was ready. However, reality slapped him in the face. When he checked the trap again, although it was triggered, there wasn't even a hair under the rock, and the bait was eaten clean. This time, Larry was unusually calm, silently replacing it with a bigger and heavier rock. It seems like the irritable brother was getting serious this time. After resetting the trap, he harshly hoped to drink some brain juice tonight. As night fell, Larry was just about to go to sleep when he heard the sound of the rat trap being triggered. Larry quickly grabbed his spear and rushed over. Judging by his expression, he must have succeeded. Here's how the battle went. It tried to escape. I quickly took out my spear to stab it, and finally, I sent it off with a knife. True to his role as the show's comic relief, even catching a rat was a thrilling affair. For comedy, Larry has competition. Oh my gosh. It turns out David was scaring a mink because it had a large eel in its mouth. He thought yelling would make it drop the eel, but a mink isn't as foolish as that. As the season's most resilient contestant, he's eaten almost everything edible on the beach. Today, he had no choice but to eat some large seaweed. Though it contains some protein, it's hard on the stomach. It's best to chop and cook it for safety. By evening, his stomach was upset, returning everything he ate to nature. Already weak, he felt even weaker. After 30 days without catching a fish, he might soon be persuaded by the crew to leave. The next morning, he planned to move his net to a different spot, but the waves brought him a large cedar instead. Even a sturdy net can't withstand being poked. David decided to try crab fishing instead, using fish as bait in his childhood. Unsure how clam meat would work as bait, he was surprised to catch a crab within 2 minutes. Discovering a new world, David decided to seize the opportunity to catch more. Soon he had caught 6 crabs and couldn't help but shout in excitement, a scene he had imagined countless times but only realized after more than 30 days. While the sun set, David enjoyed the crab meat, feeling truly satisfied for the first time in his life. Though the crab meat didn't provide much energy, it gave him hope for a turnaround. By day 33 of the survival challenge, Larry knew eating rats wouldn't be enough. So he checked his net every day at low tide and finally caught a strange big-headed fish and some crabs in the seaweed. Delighted, Larry danced and was thrilled by the following scene. His camp's trap yielded a rat slice. Teasing the rat for not reaching the bait, he reset the trap and excitedly went back to prepare his food. Just as he finished cleaning the rat, the trap was triggered again. What a situation. It seemed Larry had more rats than he could eat. Amidst adversity, David mastered crab fishing. The comedic duo might just make a comeback. Meanwhile, Justin was faring worse, having barely eaten in half a month. He probably ate less than the nearby birds. With no other options, he went to the shore to find some conch. Though the meat was scant, Enough quantity could just sustain him. The island's resources weren't bad. Laziness shouldn't lead to starvation. After his meal, Justin was left puzzled, unsure of what to do next. The scene shifts to Joseph. His boat's trial run had failed. He had been busy adding an external bracket for the past few days. The plastic bottles he had picked up came in handy. He needed one more piece of floating debris to relaunch the boat, but despite searching the beach, he found nothing. Just as he was about to give up, he finally discovered an abandoned buoy and even got a bundle of rope with it. Joseph quickly moved the boat back to the previous bay, took out the external bracket, and started securing it with the rope. Joseph believed there were big fish in the valley, even though it was 3 kilometers away. But for a chance at 3 million, he had to take the risk. After fixing the external bracket, an exciting moment arrived. The addition of the bracket indeed stabilized the boat. Thinking of the feast soon to come, Joseph rowed with increasing vigor. However, just as he reached the middle of the water, he felt a chill on his seat. Looking down, he saw that the boat was taking on water. The boat, aptly named Delicate, lived up to its reputation. Without saying more, he hurried back. Fortunately, he reached the shore before the boat could sink. After a thorough inspection, he found a small hole at the edge. He had no choice but to find something to patch it with. One day, he would sail far in the boat, but it was uncertain if he would still get to eat fish. On day 34 of the survival challenge, while others were striving for the prize, Justin ate some snail meat for breakfast. Afterwards, he fell into confusion again. Loneliness and cold swept over him, and his mind started to wander. Thinking of the days without achievements, apart from working out and eating away his supplies, he couldn't help but think of quitting. He believed life required 2 things, a spirit of adventure and happiness in body and mind. Now, having taken the adventure, as the saying goes, life is short, enjoy it while you can. Why constrain himself unnecessarily? Moreover, he had completed his task here. In that moment, Justin seemed enlightened. He made a call and withdrew from the challenge. He expressed no desire to live such a boring life. Money didn't matter. He just wanted to be fulfilled and happy. Actually, everyone had guessed this outcome. Who would focus on fitness in a wilderness survival situation? After Justin left, only 4 contestants remained. Who do you think will be the next to quit? David has now persisted for 35 days. Initially, he could only survive by eating seaweed and clams. Since discovering a great method for crab fishing 2 days ago, he's been full of energy and enthusiasm. Taking advantage of the low tide, he decided to fish again. Surprisingly, his luck continued today as he caught a 6-line fish within minutes. Although it was small, the quantity was substantial. With the fish biting fiercely, David seized the opportunity and changed his fishing spot to continue. Soon, he caught a second fish, even larger than the first. It seemed David was really making a comeback. After stringing the 2 fish together and placing them on shore, he decided to try for a third fish. It didn't take long before he caught another. Excited about eating 3 fish today, he turned around only to find that the other 2 fish were missing. Despite searching nearby, David could not find them. Strung together, the fish couldn't have flown away. Surely something took them while he was distracted. Unable to let it go, David concluded that a bald eagle must have stolen them. He cursed the bird for picking on outsiders like him. Switching to Joseph, his boat was finally repaired. He had devoted all his energy to it in recent days and hoped for no more surprises. After pushing the boat into the water, Joseph embarked on another voyage. This time there were no leaks, and although the boat was slightly tilted, it wasn't a significant problem. After rowing 2 kilometers, he reached a shallow beach, hoping to catch some large salmon. He was ready in case of a bear attack, but the bear left him only bones. After a fruitless search, Joseph felt disheartened, realizing he had missed the salmon run. He feared he might go hungry for 3 days. Back to David, he was still upset about losing the fish, but thought of the potential big catch in the water. Eagerly, he went to the shore to prepare. Typically, fish heads are excellent bait, but he was short on resources and managed to get a small fish. By chance, this turned out to be a blessing in disguise. To be safe, David decided to fish for another, planning to use one as bait and keep the other for himself. Soon, he caught a second fish. After preparing one and attaching it to the hook, He anticipated a great performance and cast it into the water. However, he exclaimed, "Where's my hook?" David tried to retrieve it while the sea was calm, but he slipped and nearly fell in. With the water temperature around 10 degrees Celsius, this would not be a problem for a younger person, but at his age, it was risky. After returning to the shelter and wringing out his wet clothes, he hurriedly crawled into his sleeping bag to stay warm and preserve his life. Today marks Nicole's 37th day in the competition. She woke up to find a large fish stranded. It struggled and hit a spike net, but sadly the water was too deep to gather the net in time. Eager, she checked after the tide went out and was shocked to find only a fish head left. Something had stolen her catch. A small head popped up from the water nearby, as if to say, "Thanks, big sister." Nicole's food crisis had begun. Without catching more fish, she'd have to eat grass. The next day, Nicole decided to act first. She checked the spike net early in the morning, but to her frustration, no fish were caught. She knew the culprit without a doubt. The net was crucial for her survival. With a black bear already causing trouble, and now a seal, she couldn't take much more. With no choice left, she moved the repaired spike net. But that was all she could do. Switching to Joseph, he missed a large salmon run while busy building a boat. But as the saying goes, one shouldn't hang from just one tree. Judging by the number of seal heads popping up, the area seemed rich in resources. He decided to fish in deeper waters. During his time with the Inuit, he learned to make a special fishing rod, typically using antlers and bone, though Joseph used wood. As someone with OCD, the rod's appearance mattered as much as its functionality. After meticulous work, he crafted the rod and hurried to the deep waters with rocks as sinkers and plastic as lures. Soon he caught a large fish known as monkfish or sea foie gras. Relieved, Joseph looked forward to a hearty meal after more than 30 days. Meanwhile, Larry felt bored without the nuisance of mice. To avoid loneliness, he kept busy and decided to make a wooden spoon today. Although it seemed unwise to focus on such tasks when food was scarce, survival isn't just about eating. Mental challenges are crucial too. After a busy day and narration, he successfully made a large wooden spoon, tested it, and cooked a pot of green hat clam soup, enjoying his meal. During this time, Nicole, unable to catch even a hare with her spike net, had to gather shellfish to survive. Today's check still showed no catch, so she boldly considered targeting a black bear, hoping to find a fish it had overlooked. With a sense of smell 7 times stronger than a detection dog, she made noise while walking to avoid encountering them. She soon found a fishtail left by a bear but dismissed it as too small. Her sense of danger increased as she ventured deeper, her sixth sense warning her of a nearby puma, a less reasonable creature than a bear, prompting her to quickly head back to camp. The camera shifts to Joseph. The craftmaster is at it again. Last time he caught a fish. Today, he set out to sea in his small boat for another round of fishing. This time, he used an ancient fishing tool, reportedly invented by Chinese fishermen. It's designed to be left on the water's surface to passively catch fish. While waiting, Joseph planned to fish in shallow waters but discovered a large plastic barrel on the sandbar. He wasn't sure what it was for, but he knew it would be useful later. That evening, he took it back to camp. After inspecting it, he found it covered in mussels. The crew had warned against eating bivalves due to possible red tide contamination, which could be lethal. But Joseph, now just skin and bones from hunger, couldn't care less. He decided to fill his stomach first. After boiling them at high heat for 678 seconds, he took one and tasted it. Delicious. The camera then turns to Larry. He has been suffering from loneliness, which clung to him like an adhesive plaster. His days revolved around chopping wood and checking fishing lines. If there was a catch, he'd cook. If not, he'd drink hot tea by the sea. At night, he'd sleep in his shelter. This repetitive cycle made the days seem endlessly long. Loneliness and exhaustion wore him down. If one had to describe him with an adjective, it would be his current state. Over the next few days, he wrestled with his thoughts. By day 50, his resolve began to waver, and he entertained thoughts of quitting. Oh my eagle eyes spotted a pair of minks in love, now seeing David as one of their own. They often flaunted their affection in front of him. David would love to gobble them up, but they were too fast. After securing his fishing line, David continued to fish. Today he aimed to explore new territories, hoping to catch even bigger fish using common cap clams as bait. He wanted to prove his skill, not just luck. After standing by the sea for half a day without a catch, he decided to try crab fishing. To his surprise, he began catching them immediately, enjoying a successful run. This is what they call enduring the bitterest hardships to rise above others. After all, anyone would struggle after a month of eating only grass. If nothing unexpected happens, the other competitors might have no hope. Like this next contestant, Nicole. With winter approaching, Nicole had prepared some wood in advance. Previously, she used it to dry fish. Now, all she could dry was her motherly love. Today was her son's 8th birthday, so she felt particularly sad and missed him. After crying, she checked the spike net, but as expected, no catch. However, reality can sometimes bring surprises. Most plants had withered already. After a long search, she could only lament that once she had plenty of fish before her and didn't cherish them. Now, she could only regret it deeply. On day 53 of the challenge, it seemed like Larry might give up. Unexpectedly, he found his spirit again. This is typical of his fiery temperament. As the weather grew colder, Larry longed for his wife. He expressed his regrets aloud on the beach, admitting he shouldn't have been glued to his phone instead of paying attention to her. Moved by his own words, he vowed to make it up to her when he returned home. Perhaps the heavens disapproved. Suddenly, dark clouds gathered and strong winds blew. Larry worried about getting struck by lightning as hail began to fall. He was relieved that his shelter held up and voiced concern for the other contestants. Though secretly, he hoped they would drop out sooner. To combat the cold, David started preparing early in the morning, but soon his hands were numb with cold. He had to crawl into his sleeping bag to stay warm. Ice crackled outside. The contestants were famished. They generally lacked foresight in storing food, and it seemed likely the competition would end before winter. Larry found his trap had worked again, revealing a flattened rat. He joked about licking it as if it were ice cream. If it weren't for the risk of parasites and slugs, he would have tried eating them earlier. As the challenge entered its final stages, enduring hunger became key. The last person standing could win $3 million, making even a rat a feast for Larry. As for how dire others' situations were, Nicole's example was telling. Previously feasting on fish and meat, she now couldn't even find grass to eat. She decided to search the woods for mushrooms, but found only poisonous ones. She finally found some horsetail, which could only be used as a toothbrush. Just as Nicole was losing hope, she spotted a berry and ate it immediately, clearly satisfied. However, she soon realized berries usually appear in clusters. This one was likely left by a bear, indicating she was in bear territory. Deciding it was too risky to continue, she returned to camp, hoping perhaps there were still fish in her spike net. By day 54, David had mastered fishing, largely solving his food issue. Yet, whenever he had a moment to himself, he missed home. He decided to make tinder by melting solid tree resin, found commonly in large trees, in a shell and mixing it with sawdust. This created easily ignitable tinder, which would be especially useful as the weather was likely to remain cold and damp. With this, his chances of winning were much higher. The camera shifts to Joseph. Just a few days ago, driven mad by hunger, he risked eating a bunch of scallops. Fortunately, the scallops were not infected and did not cause any poisoning. This temporarily solved his hunger problem. He mentioned that if it were the first season, the winners would have been decided by now, and his wife would be welcoming him home in victory. Unfortunately, this is the second season, and the contestants are more resilient to hunger. Besides him, 3 other strong players remain, so he must continue to scavenge for food. Regrettably, after a day of fishing, he caught nothing at all, not even a single hare, and his spike net was still empty. Joseph's resolve began to waver. He desperately wanted to quit and return to his wife, but the thought of the huge prize money kept him convincing himself to stay. Previously, Nicole could eat fish until she was sick of it, but now she can't catch any. After the wild vegetables and berries withered, she had to resort to eating scallops to stave off hunger. Although disgusting and minimal in energy, for the sake of the $1 million prize, she had to endure. In my opinion, her struggle is futile. The other 3 men, despite their hunger, had ways to obtain food. Apart from relying on a spike net, Nicole had no other means. Honestly, even Larry was better off, except he struggled mentally, often unable to resist performing stand-up comedy. After his performance, he checked his traps. Today, although triggered, the trap under the rock caught no rats. The rats likely sensed the danger and smartly avoided the trap. If not rats, there should be fish, but his spike net remained empty. It seemed he could only hope for his fishing rig, which also turned up empty. As the weather cooled, the fish moved to deeper waters, rendering the spike net nearly useless. After 2 months, very few fish were caught. Larry regretted bringing a spike net to the competition. Now, there wasn't much left to eat, and he had to ration his fishing bait strictly to avoid collapsing from hunger. Joseph was in this dire state, enviously watching the carefree seals. He said if the island had plenty of food and women, he would consider building a tribe here. Unfortunately, even fishing was becoming a struggle for him. He had to check his spike net for any catch. Luckily, today finally brought some fish. Joseph swiftly dispatched them in a physical frenzy. Although the 2 fish were not large, in the late stages of the challenge, they could sustain Joseph for several days. More importantly, he wanted to stop being financially dependent on his wife. He had to win this challenge and take home the $1 million prize to restore his pride as a man. Survival challenge reaches day 57. The crew's boat approaches from the water. Undoubtedly, a contestant has given up. Everyone probably guesses it's Nicole, the fish queen. She missed her son too much at home. She enjoyed the environment here, but her son hasn't seen her for 2 months. She didn't want to miss out on family for $3 million. I totally understand after hearing her out. True friends understand without saying everything, even though it's clear why she withdrew. As a woman, her endurance is respectable. After the only female contestant withdrew, only 3 challengers remain. Since mastering fishing, David rarely eats grass for hunger. Even if he catches no fish, he can catch crabs, making him currently the wealthiest contestant. After changing fishing spots a few times, his line finally shows movement. David excitedly lands a fish and boasts about his catch. "My dinner tonight." Catching such a big fish late in the challenge is a nightmare for the other contestants. As long as David keeps his composure, winning the $3 million is certain. Seeing there's still time, David decides to try fishing a bit more. Surprisingly, the second fish follows quickly. I wouldn't believe it if he said he had no special advantage. Back at camp, he strips the fish completely, quickly cooks it, enjoying meat for the first time in over 50 days, sadly, with no one to share it. Feeling a bit lonely. Survival challenge reaches day 58. Joseph planned to fish at sea, but due to strong winds and potential rain, he stays at camp eating his last stored food. Once the rain stops, he searches for food. Joseph's net uses a pulley system, allowing him to continue fishing when others cannot. Sadly, today he catches nothing and the anchor holding his net is pulled up. With the tide too high during the new and full moon, he can't fix it and must wait for low tide, meaning he'll run out of food. He decides to risk fixing it by boat. Back to David, after fitting a tree with socks, he resumes his confident fishing. He claims he always catches fish when he casts, and proves it with his actions. After catching the first fish, the second quickly follows, but it escapes due to a poor hooking. However, this barely affects him. He's survived on grass before and is more stable now. The camera turns to Larry, who's nearly starved silly lately, dreaming of nothing but eating. He keeps himself busy by chopping wood, eventually breaking down. After enduring 2 months, the environment worsens. The waves not only ruin his fishing gear, but his nets also fail to catch fish. Previously, when rats bothered him, he occasionally ate rat meat. Now all he has is dry wood. While others survive in the wilderness, Larry seeks divine intervention in his desperation. David is starkly different. Despite hunger, he never loses hope and insists on fishing by the sea every day. Although downhearted and frail, he strives for the $1 million prize. Besides gathering dry wood and tinder, his patience usually pays off. Just as David is about to reel in a fish, he exclaims, "Oh, my knee! It hurts!" The fish escapes and he injures his knee. Normally it wouldn't be a big deal, but at 50, any minor pain feels magnified. Withdrawing now would be a major loss. The scene shifts to Larry, who decides to give up. He plans to burn all his wood and finish his clams to quit the challenge. As a worker from the lower economic layers, he hoped to win the substantial prize, but 2 months of suffering have broken him. If only he could get some clear weather, he'd call to withdraw immediately. Unfortunately, it's been consistently rainy and humid, which frustrates his temperamental nature. Reluctantly, he starts foraging again. Perhaps if other contestants consider quitting, surviving another day might secure him the win. This isn't a bad plan, as Joseph is also struggling. Joseph's fishing net anchor was pulled up. Waiting for the tide to fix it could starve him, so he creates a new anchor using collected foam as a buoy tied to a large stone, effectively stabilizing his net. His delicately built boat, crucial today, unexpectedly capsizes. Hearing the water splash, I was truly worried for him. Luckily, he resurfaces unharmed within seconds and immediately presses the rescue button. The cold could soon cause hypothermia, risking his life, let alone the $3 million prize. Once energetic, Joseph now appears exhausted and ashamed, continuously apologizing to his family on camera. He believes he could survive much longer, even with hunger and loneliness, but he no longer has dry clothes. His significant weight loss is evident from his belt. In conclusion, whatever the reasons, enduring this long is commendable. If not for the energy spent on building the boat, Joseph might have had a chance at victory. With Joseph gone, only Larry and David remain for the ultimate showdown. Today is day 60 of the challenge. Larry is utterly starved, yet the prize money keeps him from quitting. Desperate to survive, he makes a new fishing device using his last 4 hooks, foam, and a stone to throw in the water, hoping for a catch. Besides fish, he plans to trap birds using old fishing nets placed on the highest mountain with some bait. Whatever he catches will help him last a bit longer. On day 61 of the challenge, David, who had injured his knee while fishing, had been recuperating in his shelter. He was uncertain whether he would heal or starve first. Reflecting on his experiences, he remembered the early days of the competition when he was the most miserable contestant, going hungry for 9 out of every 3 days. Fortunately, he didn't give up easily. After enduring a tough month, his luck turned, and he managed to survive on crabs and fish. He faced several life-threatening moments, but this was the crucial one. If he could outlast Larry, he would be the champion. Otherwise, the $3 million would go to Larry. Larry, too, had a tough time. From the start, he was the first to curse, yet he always tasted despair amidst hope. He also experienced days of starving every 3 days, but ironically, only he was favored by the rats. After moving several times without success, it was finally rat meat that saved him from dropping out due to hunger. He managed to hang on through numerous breakdowns, not knowing how much longer he would stay, but he sensed the end was near. By day 64, Larry had failed to catch any fish or birds. After taking a deep breath, he continued to persevere. Both were fighting till their last breath until the crew's boat sped towards them. Ultimately, someone couldn't hold on any longer. The camera showed Larry, who had given his all, both mentally and physically. He had vowed never to quit as long as he wasn't completely drained, but today was his limit. Although he didn't win the $3 million, he still had his family by his side. Life might be very ordinary, but isn't ordinariness a form of greatness? Yet, Larry was not content with the ordinary and later joined Season 5. On day 66, the champion of this season was already determined, but the crew hadn't informed David. Hungry as ever, he was still fishing, and his luck was as good as usual. Soon after he caught a fish, the crew's boat arrived. David thought it was a routine medical check. The crew conducted the check discreetly, which scared David into vehemently claiming he could continue. At that moment, his daughter walked up from behind. When David saw her, his nose instantly tingled with emotion. The pain and endurance of over 60 days turned into happiness at that moment. He showed his daughter everything there and shared his experiences. He had never been able to satisfy his children's wishes before, but now he could. Aren't we all like David in some way, hoping to endure tough times and welcome brighter days? This season of wilderness solitude ends here, and a new season will be updated soon. If you liked it, please stay tuned.